Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the ASCILITE Live webinar series for June. Really exciting to be here. It's been a little while since we had one of these. I think we're kind of getting back on schedule, and so it is. If you're watching the recording, it's sort of towards the end of June at the moment, getting cold all over Australia. So we're really excited. What we've had over the last few months in our ASCILITE Live webinar series is an opportunity to hear from some people that won various different awards at the ASCILITE 2022 conference in Sydney. And last month we heard from James, who won the best concise paper along with some of his co-authors. And this month we're really lucky to hear from Sam, who won, and she can correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm pretty sure it's the best full paper award. There we go. She gave me a thumbs up from ASCILITE 2022, which is really exciting because obviously not everybody gets an opportunity to go to those presentations during the conference. And so we reach out to people and say, hey, would you like to represent, maybe expand upon what you're doing a little bit as well, and give people an opportunity to watch the recording, to listen live, and also to ask some questions as well. So we can expose those really good presentations which won the awards to more ASCILITE members. And so you can see the name of the presentation there on the slide. Hopefully you can see my slides, and I'm sure Sam will introduce it a little bit more. And Sam, of course, is from the University of Adelaide, and she was just telling me that they're doing some intensive mode classes in her area, and I figured that's what this is probably about because it says accelerated learning environments, but we'll find out more about that in a second. Before we do that, I do want to do what we often do and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on and the custodians of those lands, past, present, and emerging. One of the great things about ASCILITE is that it is spread across Australia, across New Zealand, in fact, across Australasia. We have a fairly wide reach these days. And so that could be all sorts of different lands. For me, on the Gold Coast, it is the Ugambeh Nation, and I've found out recently that the Ugambeh Nation is actually made up of a whole bunch of different First Nations clans. So I'm part of and I'm going to get this wrong, the Kumanberry clan here in the Ugambeh Nation on the Gold Coast. But of course, if I was at my campus, which is in Brisbane, that would be the Jagera and the Turrbal people in Brisbane. And I always say to people, if you want to acknowledge the lands that you're on, feel free to type those in the chat as well. It wouldn't be an ASCILITE Live webinar if I didn't take an opportunity to remind you to join ASCILITE. And hopefully everybody that's listening is an ASCILITE member already. But even if you're an ASCILITE member, this is a great opportunity to remind you about the various different things that ASCILITE does, including obviously the ASCILITE Live webinar series, which I'm pretty sure is on here somewhere. Oh, somewhere on there. But as well as that, we have, oh, there we go, live webinar series. But as well as that, we have a set of special interest groups, a blog. We have the AJET journal, of course, the Australasian Journal of Educational Technology, and various other things as well. In particular, I'd encourage you to check out the special interest groups. There may be one of those that you're interested in joining. There's a list of 7 down there on the slide. Business education is a bit hidden by the controls. And then over here, the community mentoring program, which this year is in its 20th year with ASCILITE. So we've been doing that for 20 years, and we hear a lot of great things about the CMP, for sure, the community mentoring program. So I'd encourage you to look into it. Talking about encouraging you to do things, and I promise this is my last slide. The ASCILITE conference is coming up. And we talked about 2022, which was in Sydney, and we had the conference dinner at Luna Park. I think this one in 2023 is going to be compete for excitement levels. It's in Christchurch at the TPAY Conference Centre. That's the TPAY Conference Centre on the slides between December 3rd and December 6th. So I think spending early December in Christchurch sounds really, really exciting. If you want to know more about that, obviously go to 2023conference.ascilite.org. Little secret, that's always the URL. So next year it'll be 2024conference.ascilite.org. And And we just extended, or not we, the conference organisers just extended the call for papers for the conference for 2 weeks. So I'm pretty sure they're now due on the 17th of July. So if you were thinking about writing a paper, say, for example, so you can get your organisation to fund you to go to the conference, you've got an extra couple of weeks to do that. But ladies and gentlemen, the guest of the hour is definitely Sam Newell, who, as I said to you, very excitingly won the Full Paper Award at the ASCILITE 2022 conference. I didn't put Sam's bio on the slides. I figured you would have read a little bit about her in the newsletter already. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit stop sharing, and I'm going to give control of the slides to Sam and then just hand over to her to tell us a little bit about what they're doing at the University of Adelaide. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much. Hopefully you can see this. I just need to drag the little participants bar. Right. Can everyone hear me and see? Yep. So before we get stuck into the presentation proper, I'd like to introduce you to myself outside of the world of academia. I have a range of hobbies and interests. I am a whole person behind the computer screen, and I try and share this with my students as much as possible. I humanize myself, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. So I'll just sort of do a quick whip around. This is me outside of my teaching. I have a lovely husband named Andrew. We've been together a really long time. And I have a beautiful little nephew named Leo, and there he is tucking into a baby chino, and I love taking him out to cafes and letting him cover his face with chocolate powder. Last year, I took my dad to Italy for the first time. I've luckily been before, but in his 60 odd years of being on this earth, he's never been there, and that's where our family is from. So this photo is actually in Venice when it was flooding, and they do have unusual flooding events that happen usually, you know, in the kind of November time of year, and we were lucky enough to see that. I love cats. I have 4. And as you can see, I've got a bit of an affinity towards black cats, and there's one of mine at the bottom of the screen there. And while I was studying, I was also really lucky to have had the opportunity to go on a student exchange to St. Catherine's in Cambridge in the UK. And it was a wonderful experience. And, you know, it represents me as a lifelong learner and a learner that likes to connect with other learners from around the globe and go and engage in different learning contexts as well. And I learn a lot from others and how their educational institutions are run and inspire me. So that's a little bit about me. Well, I would love to know, if you're happy to share, just pop your answer in the chat of what's your hobby. Is there a hobby that you like in particular? I think you've probably guessed that mine might be traveling, or perhaps animal ownership. I also really like gardening, but I'd love to know a little bit more about you. See if I can just see that while I'm sharing. Here we go. We're getting some up in the chat. Personal finance, low and slow barbecue. Michael, that's amazing. I love that too. Master chef, going out for coffee. Okay, so another couple of foodies in the room. That's so cool. It's really lovely to get to know you. Thank you. So feel free to use this chat, you know, and have a bit more of a back and forth session rather than me just talking to you. And as being from Adelaide, I am a coffee snob as well. So the presentation that I'm going to talk about today is obviously what won me the award last year at the ASCILITE conference, and it was about maximising rapport in accelerated learning environments. So that can mean quite a few things. There's quite a few unis that are doing, you know, 6-week blocks, 8-week, 10-week intensive blocks, whatever that means to you. But it's also about how do we build rapport in that fully online learning environment where you have very limited opportunities or none at all for seeing students face to face. So why would we care about this idea of rapport at all? Well, the research tells us that it's actually really important, because not only does it enhance the student experience and therefore their learning, it's also directly related to student satisfaction, and importantly, their well-being. Now, if you know anything about psychology, you'll know there's this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the need to belong and connect with others is really a important and innate human need. And that also happens in the learning environment. They're looking for those experiences when they come to our institutions. And we see that in the data as well, that when students feel like they have more of a connection with either staff or their peers, then it does actually reduce the overall attrition rate. So it's worth considering this and how well we do that in our current courses, and any strategies that we can employ to improve and build rapport. And when you look to the literature, it basically summarizes that in this concept of transactional distance. So it's the difference in understanding between teachers and students that can be, I guess, the issue can be exacerbated by technology. It can either increase that distance, or we can incorporate some strategies that reduce that difference in understanding between teacher and student mediated through technology. But of course, there are humans on either side of that technology, and there are some other factors in play. The student's willingness to engage in that dialogue, in reducing that distance, their ability to be a proactive learner or an autonomous learner, but also on the teaching side of things, how often we communicate with students and what the quality of that is like. So we'll be talking a little bit about some strategies today for how you can, I guess, address those limiting factors. So when we conducted our research, we specifically looked at what were those technology-enabled strategies that allow us to facilitate that rapport in these fully online environments. So our data that we collected was from 129 students and 8 educators. So quite a nice little slice of our student body and also our teaching team. And we took this data from a range of resources. We did, I suppose, use a formal student survey, but we also looked at some other areas of data that we incorporated into this overall picture of our student experience. So we looked at unsolicited email feedback that students have given us about their experience. We actually looked at the recording transcripts of classes to see what was happening. We looked at discussion boards, what was being talked about or not talked about. We reviewed the policies and guidelines. We also had teaching team peer discussions, and then also personal reflections. So what we're doing is gathering a whole range of data in this study, and then we reduced it down into a few emerging themes with some specific strategies that were underneath those themes. So like we have condensed all of that data down into one set of strategies that you can use. This face here is our token student that we're going to talk about. And this face is not real. This face is actually an amalgamation too of lots of faces on a database. This is from a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And it is basically a mishmash of other faces that they have in their database. So that she's going to be our representative student today, that we're going to talk about her experience and go on her journey and what has helped her throughout her learning experience. So this is our representative student. Her name's Monica. She actually studies remotely as she lives in Tasmania. She is a personal carer, but also helps with the care of other students and other children with intellectual disabilities. She has one child who's 9 and his name is Max. And she really got a love for helping others and understanding more about human learning through her experience with children with intellectual disability. So she wanted to do something with that. And she signed up then to a graduate diploma in psychology, which is fully online. And this is 6-week teaching period. So it's an intensive program that the students go through, which is an accelerated learning environment. And she really wanted to start this program. Like many of our students were inspired during lockdown in 2020, wondering what they wanted to do, having a bit of a personal reflection on their career and where they wanted to go. So this was Monica's decision to join us. She was a little bit concerned throughout her time in COVID, living in Tasmania, being a little bit disconnected from others, that COVID experience of not being able to go to each other's houses, you know, being in lockdown or whatever, made her a little bit more hesitant to initially engage in the online learning environment. She didn't really want to feel lonely throughout her learning journey. And this is a very common theme with students, that it is 51.5% of our students said it was either very or extremely important that they get time to connect with their peers. But I guess on the other side of that, being adult learners, being fully online, they do recognize they actually have little time to do so. So they think it's really, really important, but they don't actually have a lot of time to do it. So it's about us working out how to maximize that opportunity in the limited time that they have, not only in an accelerated course, but just recognizing that adult learners have very busy lives as well. So when Monica signed up to our course, she enrolled in her first one, and then she attended what we would call a kickoff webinar. So it gets students to come in, and this is a relatively informal session before any of the formal teaching happens, where students get to see each other in gallery view. They get to go into breakout rooms in their actual classes before they even start, so they can start to build some of those peer-to-peer connections. And this is a really important opportunity for them to start to feel like there are faces, there are real people behind this course, and it really sets the tone for getting as much engagement as possible and peer-to-peer facilitated discussion even before the course starts. Because if we didn't have that, our fear is then they would just see, you know, names in the discussion board randomly, don't know who that is. Hard for them to visualize the person behind that. So it's a really important strategy that we use to get them to start to break down that transactional distance. So Monica has enrolled in her first course. She has selected class 3, and in particular, she's chosen a class time that is after hours, because she's picked a time when her son Max has gone to bed. So another important stage here for humanizing the educator, that when students have that opportunity to select their instructor, the class that they would like to go into, it's really, it's an intentional effort on our part to ask those instructors to include a bio and photo, a little bit about themselves, their research, because we like to include that research teaching nexus, and something about them outside of teaching or outside of the course as well, which is what I engaged in right at the start of this session when I shared a little bit about myself, humanize myself, reduce some of that transactional distance. And then when the students actually go into the asynchronous learning environment, this is where we can use some of those other, what we would call paralanguage features. So things outside of our words, such as smiley faces. We might even include some memes or GIFs to really humanize that space, and also connect with students in the kind of language and using those paralanguage features that they would use with each other in casual conversations. So those smiley faces, things like that. I'll talk about it a little bit later on, but try not to be afraid of using things like smiley faces, because the research shows us that it actually helps convey a sense of warmth, but we'll revisit that. But I always make an intentional effort to put up funny photos, GIFs, introduce as much of the human element into this very formal announcement space as much as possible. So Monica comes in and she sees this and she's feeling a little bit more enthusiastic, that she's got a bit of a sense of who this teaching team is and who some of her peers are when she's signed up to this course. So this is, you can see some more direct examples. So these are actual examples that we've used in the teaching team of putting up little funny pictures and things like that including as much as yourself as possible in the lead up to these synchronous times. So there's a synchronous tutorial time, but as much of the human element as possible to put in around that, to build up that, and also about including your expectations from students in when we do get together in the tutorial space. So that's encouraging them to use the cameras, to use the microphones. So when Monica is getting ready for her first tutorial, she receives an announcement from her tutor, who has actually said that it is St. Patrick's Day that week, the week of their first tutorial. And just as a fun thing, if they're comfortable doing it, if they could all come to class wearing something green, or perhaps having something green in the background, however they would like to engage in the activity, but just as something fun to do. She was a little bit unsure about this activity at first because she didn't know if anybody else would actually follow along with it. It was a bit of a leap of faith. But thankfully, when she came to class, she noticed that other people too had been brave enough to wear green and turn up for St. Patrick's Day. So there's two things that I want to talk about here in doing this kind of activity. It allows us to connect with each other, and that is from the teacher to the students, but student to student as well, engaging with something like this. But also it helps to reduce that transactional distance when you encourage them to use gallery view rather than slideshows. Now, I know that I should be walking the talk today, and I should have done this entire talk today just by using gallery view instead of a PowerPoint slide. Imagine in my normal teaching environment, I try to do this as much as possible, because I think that's really when you see the reactions of other students, and that's when they have time to, it feels easier for them to connect with each other. So Monica comes into this class, she's wearing green. She's actually loving the fact that she can see other students also there with their cameras on, but also engaging in the activity. And she feels like it's a bit more of a learning community. And over the next few weeks, they've engaged in Funny Hat Day, and also it was Pride Month. So some students were supported, I guess, with that really external support by suggesting if they would like to participate, change a background to something that supports or, you know, something in theme of Pride Month. So that's what you can see there. So as she's gone through the course, this is just an intentional activity on the part of the teacher to engage students with each other, but reduce that transactional distance. And like we've talked about as we've gone through this session so far, the strongest impact on Monica was when she had opportunities to interact with other students. And so a lot of the time when we're talking about transactional distance, the focus can be on how do I, as the teacher, reach out to my students and have them know me. That's one aspect of it. And that's what we were talking about earlier when I introduced photos about myself, when I use GIFs and things like that, and I'm connecting with the students. But what is really also equally, if not more important, is that students get a chance to work with each other. And that's supported by psychology research. When you think about key studies in psychology, like, you know, in-group, out-group studies and their findings about students really want to build that sense of in-group. So anything that we can do to increase student-to-student contact is going to improve the sense of learning community overall. You can do that in some kind of unstructured ways. You can have office hours that essentially operate as a coffee shop hour, where students can come along for a chat and just bring, you know, a cup of tea, coffee, whatever they like, and have an unstructured discussion and give them that opportunity to chat with each other. You can do that through forum posts, but that can be seen by students as a very formal space, not really for sporadic discussion, but it is an option for you. You can do that through assessments by building in-group assignments, which I know can seem a little bit difficult and to organise, I suppose, in the online environment, but they can be done using really good strategies of giving them project spaces and, you know, just giving extra support and facilitating their catch-up times around that. It can work really powerfully. But in your tutorial sessions, it's really making use of the breakout room space, giving them a chance to hear each other, what they're thinking. Something else that we are doing at the moment at the University of Adelaide to bring in some more opportunity for peers to see what each other are thinking is introducing echo polls, which is an asynchronous polling solution that we can embed into the learning management system, which we use Canvas. And it's essentially like Mentimeter, where you can select a response, but asynchronously, students will be able to see what the other students are thinking at the moment about a particular topic. So another avenue that we're exploring, and we're implementing that at the moment so that they can connect with what each other are thinking in an asynchronous way outside of tutorials. One really easy way to do this is by using icebreakers. So you would notice that I try and walk the talk, and I asked you to talk about your hobbies, breaking down that transactional distance. So the one that I suggested today was hobbies, but there are plenty of others that you can use. Ones that I've used quite successfully, and I tend to rely on these ones a lot because I think they're really useful, is asking students where they're learning from. And this can be really helpful because then students can then find other peers that might just happen to be in the same state as them, which is obviously really important in the online environment for them to see where they are. And so I have had an occasion where students that have been studying in the same state have actually gone on to then form real study groups in person in that state. So, you know, it can have really fantastic impact on the students' learning. And the other one that I've used is what TV show character reminds you of yourself. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, it ties in naturally to some psychology concepts around identity formation, but also it allows the students to get a sense of who these other students are as people. And maybe there are some characteristics, personality quirks, or something of the like that they see in another student when they comment on that is similar to themselves. Again, building up any opportunity for students to connect with each other and make the human as visible as possible. And I'd love it if you just take a moment now to pop in the chat box any good icebreakers that you use in any of your classes, or that you've read about, want to try but you haven't yet, and we'll use that as an opportunity for you to share some more strategies with each other. Yeah, favorite food's a good one. Yeah, even what are you eating for lunch today is a nice one, because it really makes it quite immediate that what's happening in someone's world right now. Ah, favorite piece of tech. That's a cool one. I suppose that splits the class down the middle between the Android Apple divide pretty quickly. I've heard of what color would you be and why, or what animal would you be and why. But yeah, I really like some of these ideas. Nintendo Switch. So feel free, as I'm talking, keep adding these examples. We'll build up a bit of a bank of them for you to walk away with some additional ideas. Thank you. So as I was mentioning before, there is the potential, when you increase this opportunity for peers to get to know each other on a very personal and human level, but also kind of a geographical level, for them to then want to take this a step further and build formal study groups. And this has happened in courses of mine gone by. Some of these people, from what I last hear, are still colleagues now. And I use that term intentionally, this idea of peers not just being student, but actually being colleagues, because that's the language that they start to use when they engage in these formal study groups. They start to see each other as potential working colleagues now and into the future. And you might like to reflect on your journey, the people that you studied with. I know for me personally, some of the people that I studied with in my honours and PhD, I'm now working with personally on a teaching team on a day-to-day basis. So some of these people do translate from being students to colleagues. So it's really nice that students are recognizing this and shifting that language themselves. So even if they're not studying in the same state, and if they're not catching up face-to-face, I always recommend to students, if they want to start a study group, they can always advertise this in a discussion forum, saying that they're looking for potential participants in a study group. And I give them some advice about using what I call the shut up and write, or the Pomodoro technique, of having these set writing sprints with then casual chat breaks in between. And the only thing that I add in extra is that I give an extra layer of information to students about reminding them that they can work together to increase accountability for each other, to get assignments finished. But in that talk break between their writing sprints, it's better to talk about other stuff and not the assignment, so that you can get around any potential issues of academic integrity or any collusion, anything like that. So say, use that time to keep each other accountable, but then get to know each other as colleagues and friends in the talking time instead. That's my advice anyway. Other things that I do to get students to work together more in teams and get that group sense of identity and the peer-to-peer connection is to not just use Kahoot to check for understanding or formative feedback as an individual, but I get them to work in teams in breakout rooms. And that allows them to pick a team name. They can choose an identity. You know, one week I said, you know, everyone pick a different animal and that's your team, you know, and it gets them working as an in-group and working together, and also checking each other's misconceptions. It can be a really powerful experience when students are learning from each other. So try Kahoot in team mode instead of just using it as an individual mode. I also spoke earlier about introducing more polling opportunities so students can see what each other are thinking. You can do that obviously in Zoom, for example. You can set up polls so that can happen synchronously, or consider using something like Echo Poll to have asynchronous polling, which can be very powerful. So when students are working on problems together, I give them case-based learning, so some scenarios, and then they have to work around that problem together in a group, and then they can report back. And then essentially what happens is a bit of team teaching. So students teaching other students, which is really powerful. And that is helping them to see that they're all working together towards a common goal, reducing that transactional distance and building that rapport between them. But what it also does is sharing power between the teacher and the student, which I think can also help with the rapport between teachers and students. Any opportunity that you give to allow students to have a share in that power situation, I think can be really useful. And the data essentially tells us that it does, from the students' opinions anyway, that helps to build rapport with teachers too. Now, as a bit of an aside, my current research is taking that idea a step further and seeing how I can engage students in more negotiated learning, or co-construction of learning materials, using students as partners as a lens. So I'm always trying to, I guess, look at avenues that I can reduce the power imbalance, because I know that it builds a sense of learning community and it helps to build that rapport with my students. But a word of warning about getting students just to engage fully in a range of channels with each other, that once you take it outside of that controllable LMS, there is always the potential for some issues. So we're going to say this is Monica's feedback, but this is a real quote from a student, that they had a better experience when they weren't part of the Facebook group that a student had developed just for students to use, because it ended up being an echo chamber of panic around the assignment, and it then transferred into the course itself, and I was getting a lot of concerned students. I didn't know where this had arisen from, and then I found out from chatting to a couple of students that it had started in the Facebook group, which obviously we have no control over then. So it's I wouldn't say discourage it, but I would say, just like if you are asking students to set up some study groups, give them some additional information and scaffolding and skills around that into the correct use of it. So any assignment questions, you should tell them that's not really a spot for the Facebook group. That's for in the course, so that we can give you guidance on that. Just like when I was talking about in the study group, try not to talk too much about the assessments in your talking time between writing sprints. Use that for building community and getting to know each other, and then you won't have any potential issues with collusion or academic integrity. And this is the major part, I would say, of the teaching strategy that builds rapport in online environments. And it's this idea of having points of check-in. It seems informal now when I post funny pictures and memes and things like that. But what this adds up to in total is a sense that you care about the students, and that builds the sense of rapport. So we'll walk through a couple of examples of how this happens in real time, and I think you'll get a bit of a sense for it. So you can put up little memes and pictures in the discussion forums. You can also ask students to respond to how they're feeling at the moment in synchronous sessions by giving a Zoom reaction. How are you happy in the course at the moment? Thumbs up, thumbs down, or yes, no, depending on which tool you use. Now, these little check-ins give you then the opportunity to then have a moment to act and have real conversations or targeted personal emails that address any red flags that you might see from students that might be at risk. This is one of my personal announcement posts where I put it up about 1 week out from the major assignment being due. How are you feeling? Wanting to normalize that experience for students, that other students, might also be feeling like they may be struggling or not quite get it yet, or a bit nervous about the final assessment. Again, putting this human back into the interaction that is mediated through the technology. So I put up a few little funny things, and this is my check-in. This is an asynchronous check-in, and this is about being honest about the journey. So students likely feel a little bit disconnected at times when they're learning in a fully online environment, that they might be the only one that is struggling to understand the assessment requirements. Maybe they're just the only ones that aren't getting it, and they're worrying about that. And it is worth being honest about the journey with students. This is a key place where we can build that rapport with them. So something that I often do is tell students about my learning journey and how I felt uncomfortable at that time as well. And that there were times when I wasn't sure if I was getting it, if I was going to be good enough, if I was going to reach that endpoint, that goal that I wanted. And it normalizes it for students. And this is called intellectual candor. And it's essentially a shortcut to rapport building. It's verbalizing that vulnerability in your academic thinking. And it's not just about you reflecting back when you were a student that this was difficult, but now you're perfect. This is about having very honest discussions with students over a range of mediums whenever you get that chance, to really normalize that part of the intellectual journey is having doubts. And, so that what that might look like in practice is saying things like, I'm not quite understanding this yet, but what I'm thinking is, or what I struggle with my own research is, X, Y, Z. And I will have students come to me and talk to me about issues that they're having in research methods, for example. And I will say, yeah, I totally understand that, because I am now a qualitative researcher, because I found that I am much more comfortable working with text than I am with numbers. So I'm normalizing that with my students. So a student on that discussion board of how are they feeling posted this picture. So clearly they're going through a bit of a journey. I wasn't exactly sure where they were in that reality section of that journey. But I took that moment to personally, this is that there was the check-in And then there was that opportunity for the personal response. So I responded to students basically saying, you know, in this part of my learning journey, I did feel like this. I was never sure if I was going to get this, you know, but thankfully, you know, with reflection, I can see that I did, in fact, meet that threshold concept and I got it. You know, you can too. So, you know, it is good to normalize that. So here are some other responses that students gave. I thought the ones kind of on the left of the screen were not really too much of a problem. They were just kind of putting standard relatable things about being a student that I think we can probably all relate to. You know, you can give a thumbs up and a quick response to that. But it was when I saw something like and it was actually a GIF, it's a moving drowning GIF, that is something that my check-in alerted me to, that perhaps I needed a personal response at this point in time. If they're feeling like they are drowning, then that's a clear sign to me that I can act at this at-risk student. So this is a lot of text. I understand that. I'm not going to talk about everything that's on here. I'm just going to point out a way that you could build rapport in this kind of situation. So from the discussion with the student, it found out they weren't really looking after themselves. This is now the time when I can do something to help connect with the human behind the email. You know, so, you know, I sent through this thing about things they can do for self-care to look after themselves. But I wanted to make sure I pointed out number 8 in particular, just think positively, is actually a really good example of what we would call toxic positivity. You know, we're all going to feel uncomfortable. We're all going to feel like when we're going on a learning journey that some bits are challenging and we're not sure if we're going to overcome them. So I tried to take the personal element into this, started connecting with them. You know, what are you listening to at the moment? I use music when I'm feeling stressed out or overwhelmed. Is there something that you're connecting to or listening to right now? So that's the personal way that I dealt with that red flag. Now I'm going to come back to this idea of emojis, and there might be some different opinions about the use of emojis in interactions with students. But thankfully, I didn't have to do that research. That was done for me. So Moffat and co. ran some studies of looking at assignment feedback, and they manipulated various aspects of the feedback to include more or less of these paralanguage features, which are things like emoji, smiley faces. And what they found was, and I carry this with me and I tell other educators this as well, using exactly 3 smiley faces throughout your interactions with a student, whether it be assignment, feedback, email, whatever, they found using 3 provided a sense of maximum warmth and emotionality without any perceived impact on the teacher's sense of professionalism or competence. And we theorize that's for a couple of reasons, but it's mainly down to this normalizing of using emojis in everyday conversation. So what it does is it puts the human back into it. When we're texting with our friends or on Messenger, WhatsApp, whatever, we will use these paralanguage features to convey that how this information should be received. You know, this is a positive message, but you might not be sure if you're actually going to take this in a positive way. So I'll put a smiley face, so then you'll actually know that this is meant to be a light-hearted response. So in the same way that we do that in our everyday life, you can use those same features, the paralanguage features like smiley faces, emojis, with your students, and they just recognize it for that it's you putting the human back in that comment. So don't be afraid. The research says if you don't go overboard, it has no deficit on your sense of professionalism or competence. So, I mean, this was just a couple of studies. It wasn't just one. They actually ran multiple studies, but it's encouraging enough for me to have given it a go. And the student feedback is quite positive about it. And I've had students in particular comment on my encouraging tone. So I'm going to take it that that's exactly what was intended from my smiley faces. So we're talking a lot about how to build rapport with students in your courses. And the hardest thing is at this point is when the course finishes. You don't know if you're going to have this student again in the future. And it seems like a waste to build up all of that rapport between the students, between yourself and the student, and then for it just to go cut end of term, end of semester, end of teaching period, whatever you call it, and then that's it. So I'd like to encourage you to consider ways that you can continue that conversation and keep that rapport with students. You could do that in a couple of ways. The way that I do it is by offering them guidance which is aligned with where their goal is, where they want to end up at the end of their learning journey. So I provide usually, probably in the last week of class, I will give some information about volunteering and I'll leave it open. I'll say, students, if you want to book in a quick Zoom chat with me to talk about this, about any volunteering that you might like to do, that will continue to develop those skills that you were gaining throughout this course or is very aligned to where you want to be in the future, that we can do that. We can continue this conversation. I'm here if you ever want to check back in and talk about where you're at in that journey. And you can also do that through formal career literacy webinars. Allow them to see that you are with them, not just in this course, but through this learning journey. And that's a student quote just at the bottom of the screen. They've really enjoyed it. They're thinking more about this learning experience extending into, where they want to end up ultimately with their goal. So here's one of my posts that I put up in the final week about encouraging them to consider some volunteering roles. And then after that, I mentioned that you can book in a time with me and we can have more of a chat about these. But these are some really excellent volunteering positions that align with the kind of skills that you're developing in the graduate diploma in psychology. I want to talk now, I want to kind of shift focus a little bit for those that are doing any kind of education research or interested in it, any kind of scholarship of teaching and learning, or even some action research where you reflect back on your practice. You can see right back at the start of this presentation, I mentioned a whole range of sources of data that we collected and then amalgamated into our thematic analysis. Now, I'd like you to consider the different sources of data that you normally include when you're undertaking research relating to teaching practice. Now, it might not be teaching practice as in you're a practicing educator, you might be supporting other educators, but when you're looking at research in this field, what are the sources of data that you rely on to give you that information? Feel free to pop that answer in the chat. Survey polls. Yeah, the $1 million question. Student feedback, course evaluations, absolutely. I would encourage you to also have a separate folder in your email of where you can keep unsolicited student feedback, those random, hey, thanks, that really helped me type feedback. Drag and drop and keep it in a separate folder. I think that can be very helpful as well because it is a useful source of student feedback that wasn't elicited through a formal survey or, CELT or whatever you call it. I like that Michael referred to this as the $1 million question. So I'm going to give you somewhat of an answer. And it was what we drew upon when we were designing this study. And I'd like to give this resource to you as well, to consider using different sources of data when you're evaluating teaching practice. So this is the James Cook University 4-quadrant model. I'm not aligned with James Cook University, but I love this model and I've used it in other professional development presentations because I want people to think about all of the different sources of data they can use to inform, reflect on their teaching practice. So even if you have your phone here or you want to take a screenshot or something, you can always just look up the James Cook University 4-quadrant model, of course. But consider this if you're wanting to go for any teaching awards, just want to improve your practice. This is a really useful source of, and it's just a reminder of all the different bits of information that we could look at to inform our teaching practice. Oh, excellent. I'm actually really glad this 4-quadrant model is getting out there. Thanks, Michael, for sharing that. So I was going to say, I'm pretty sure that was my last slide. Yep. And then a little thank you from me. But I'm going to leave this one up and I'm going to formally conclude my presentation now. That's everything I wanted to share with you. Continue to share with each other any ideas that you have around icebreakers or sources of student data. But I just want to thank you for your time today and an opportunity to speak about building rapport in our online learning environments, because I'm really passionate about it. So thank you so much.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Sam. So I had lots of questions written down for you, but first and foremost, I want to say I'm not surprised you won the best full paper award. That was awesome. Really practical advice. Thank you. I appreciate it a lot. And lots of the things you were saying, I'm going, oh yeah, these are things that I do and things that I try to do really well. Let's see if anyone else has any questions. I've got lots of questions, but well, I'll hand the floor to anyone else that has any questions, and feel free, if you're shy, ladies and gentlemen, to type in the chat. I learned that from Sam. Otherwise, I'm happy for you to open your microphone and ask the questions. And if not, that's okay. Maybe they're typing as we speak, Sam. I had intellectual candor written down on my list, and then I had to cross it out because you said it, right? I was like, damn, she said that, right?
It used to be called intellectual streaking, which I love.
Hey.
I understand why they changed it to candor.
No, and I've had people talk to me about intellectual candor and that idea that you as an academic as a teacher, need to demonstrate when you don't know something, and that really helps the students connect with you. I've found that young academics find that difficult sometimes. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And then I'd be interested in your thought talking about academics. I've also had people say to me, well, you wear your heart on your sleeve too much, or you give students too much. And I'm like you, I give them heaps. Like I had somebody come up to me afterwards and say, oh, I really love the stories about your father-in-law. He sounds like a really good bloke. And I was like, no, he's not really that good a bloke. But, they know him. They feel like they know him because I tell stories about him. I tell stories about all sorts, my parents, my wife, my kids, Is there some people, I guess, are concerned that you're giving away too much, or maybe and that, I guess that relates to the idea of intellectual candor. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is, I guess, what's the risk? I mean, if you think about how much we put out about ourselves on social media, people do get an insight into our lives of what food we had for, last Sunday brunch, because we take photos of it and put it up, or things like that. I guess I understand that there's the personal professional divide. And so it is up to each individual educator to find out where that line is for them. But I don't think that anything I share is anything that compromises myself or people that I care about. It's just an introduction to myself. So it's for you finding that spot where you're comfortable, where that line is, I think is the key. But, let's say that you also supervise PhD students. That's a very long relationship. Within that relationship, students are going to learn a little bit about you, as you go, your research interests, where you're going to present at a conference, things like that. They'll find out more and more about you as you go through that journey. What privileges those students, I guess? Why are you feeling comfortable sharing with those students and you're not comfortable sharing with other students? So I think that's all it is. I think teaching is a relationship-based thing.
Hmm.
And it's up to you to work out where that line is. But I guess I would lean towards being not afraid to share a little bit about yourself. Now, I remember back to Peter Felton's keynote at the ASCILITE conference, where he shared not necessarily a photo of himself, but he posted a photo about, it was an old family photo of his grandfather and his learning journey, and how he started from kind of meager beginnings, quite a poor family that didn't have anything, and then, you know, introduced his journey that way. So it's about finding where you're comfortable, showing your humanness in the teaching relationship.
Fair. I like that. I mean, what's the harm? I like that argument, but I also like, yeah, you could share these stories that don't have to be that personal, you know.
Yeah, what you had for lunch today, I would say, you know, it still meets that goal, but it's not too personal. You know?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. One other question. I'm conscious that we're almost at time, but I did want to ask you about EQ. Right. I've had people say to me, "Oh, you've got really good EQ, Michael. You know, the way you write your emails and those kinds of things." And I mean, it's not intentional. I guess that's probably true for most people that get told they've got good EQ. I'd imagine some of our colleagues, though, are a little bit and hope nobody in the room, obviously, but, you know, maybe a little awkward. And maybe, I mean, that kind of goes along with the professor shtick. So have you got any
Yeah, I'm a bit weird. I'm a bit eccentric.
Yeah.
That's right.
Have you got any tips or any advice for people in terms of, like, if you don't have good EQ, if you maybe consider yourself a little awkward, if this stuff doesn't come naturally to you, any tips on how you might, you know, I don't know, fake it? I guess is what I'm asking.
Do you know what? We had this conversation this week just in our shared office with other educators, and we sometimes get a bit of emotional fatigue at this point of the year after we've, you know, taught several courses in a row. And we do tend to outsource what we've been doing lately anyway, as of this year. We're outsourcing some of our empathy to ChatGPT.
Okay.
So you can actually use ChatGPT to help you construct announcements or emails, replies to students when you're kind of not feeling like you want to write like fully supportive emails, you just don't have it in you. Jump onto ChatGPT saying, this is what I'm trying to say, write it in a very supportive tone for a student, and it will help you. And by doing that a few times, maybe we'll build up some capacity and teach you some sentences or, you know, ways to construct
I like that.
Your communications with students. Try it. It's a good hack. It's one way we can use ChatGPT in a really wholesome way.
I like
Who
that.
would have thought taking, you know, the human into ChatGPT and then pulling the empathy back out? But
Would make you more empathetic. Yes, the AI makes you more empathetic. That is odd. There you go. You got a crying emoji from like that. Okay, that's awesome. Well, I'm very conscious that we're over time. I'm sure that your contact details are available online and on the paper as well. So if anyone wants to touch base with Sam, feel free to do so. But apart from that, I'll say once again, thank you so much, Sam, for coming along and presenting to us. And I'll make the recording available as long as you're happy for me to do that.
absolutely.
And I'm sure lots of other ASCILITE colleagues will really appreciate this really practical advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thanks everyone for listening. See you later.